Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Moadim Lesimcha. And to those of our friends and relatives or whomever they may be, our neighbors who are celebrating Easter this weekend, also a happy Easter to them. We find ourselves at a very special moment in this moment of repetition in our Jewish calendar in the context of our Passover and our Torah reading. And I want to suggest to you today that our Passover and the readings that we engage in on Passover every year are about our recognition of our place in the world and the reality of the world around us, along with the recognition of the possibility of redemption. And let me start from the beginning in a particular strange way, a beginning that's not the beginning of anything. This moment, in fact, today, in rabbinic lore, is the moment of the beginning of the conclusion of the story of Purim. You may or may not know the story of Purim in Megillat Esther, Purim, which we celebrated last month, in the month of Adar, lasts approximately 15 months. Queen Esther is in Achashverosh's palace from Tevet, the year before the Purim that is celebrated. Purim, the holiday of Purim, is named after the lottery of Haman, evil Haman, but at the time we didn't know what the end of the story was going to be like. It is today, actually, following the very second day of the Passover, that the tables turn on Haman and the enemies of the Jews. It is today, according to rabbinic lore, that Haman is hanged, and that Achashverosh offers permission to the Jews to defend themselves. And it is actually in the conclusion, the very concluding day of the Passover, it is on that day that the Jews defend themselves. So really the week of the Passover is a week not only of the redemption in terms of the exodus from Egypt, but the redemption of Purim as well, a redemption in the context of the very first recorded, nationally organized, government-organized, anti-Semitic attack against the Jewish people, who are a minority in the Persian Empire. And here, in the context of that powerlessness, the Jews are able to somehow be saved. And the beginning of their being saved, the beginning of that moment, occurs today, according to rabbinic lore in Jewish history. And so we celebrate at this moment a number of different elements of redemption and of saving. And we read in this Torah portion, in this week's Torah portion, another moment of a glimmer of redemption, and in the Haftorah, a vision of redemption. We have two very special readings in the Torah and the Haftorah during the week of Passover. The first is Exodus chapter 33 that we read, and the second is out of the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37. In Exodus chapter 33, we find ourselves in a really interesting place. Chapter 32 is the story of the golden calf. Moses is on the mountain. Moses does not come down. The children of Israel create a golden calf. God gets very angry. Moses comes down. Moses is despondent. And at the end of this saga and the killing that occurs following the saga and the people of Israel turning against each other, God turns to Moses and says to Moses, I have grown tired of these people. These are the people I took out of Egypt in the context of the Exodus. These are the people I brought out and put in front of Mount Sinai. These are the people with whom I made the covenant. You've been gone for this time, and look at them now. Look at what's going on. I'm going to leave these people aside. I'm going to turn you into a great nation. You go out. We will leave them in the desert to die. You go, and you will become the originator, the parent, the ancestor of the chosen people. And Moses talks God out of this. And in a moment of true closeness with God, Moses becomes the one leader, the one Hebrew person, the one Jewish person to come closest to God and to come closest to a sense of the transcendent, to a sense of the divine. And our understanding of this occurs in the context of a formula here in this passage that is repeated 5 times. That formula occurs in the Hebrew Bible a few times, but occurs here 5 times and is repeated over and over again. And the formula is in Hebrew, Matzati chen be'enecha. Im matzati chen be'enecha, matzata chen be'enai. The whole notion of limtzo chen be'enei, matzati chen. If Moses says to God, I have found grace in your eyes. This formula is repeated approximately 18 times, 1.5 dozen times, 19 times in the Hebrew Bible in various contexts. It's repeated twice in the context of the story of Jacob and Esau. It's repeated once when Jacob asks Joseph not to bury him in Egypt, but to bury him in the land of Israel. It's repeated in the context of the story of Ruth, in the context of the story of Esther. It's repeated on a number of occasions. Here it's repeated 5 times. Moses is in crisis, and God is in crisis. God wants to give up on the people of Israel. And Moses says no in the context of this moment of crisis, wherein Moses says, I don't know why you have chosen me to lead this people. Who are these people you chose me to lead? What am I to do here? Moses finds the strength to say to God, perhaps I have found grace in your eyes. The same occurs for Jacob and Esau. Jacob is afraid Esau is going to kill him and sends messengers out with gifts saying, I would like to find grace in your eyes. The same occurs in the context of the story of Ruth. When Boaz recognizes her and she says, I am a Gentile woman, why have I found grace in your eyes? The same occurs in the context of the story of Esther, when she pleads with Ahasuerus to allow her people to be saved and says, if I have found grace in your eyes. This glimmer of our redemption, this glimmer of our personal rescue, of our way forward, has to do with an other, finding grace, finding chen, finding virtue in their eyes. And then there is Ezekiel. Whereas the story of Moses and God is a story of personal redemption and the personal relationship between Moses and God and the personal notion of God finding the virtue, the grace that Moses has found through God's eyes. The story in the book of Ezekiel is of a vision of the valley of dry bones that God brings together and that God gives life to in the context of some kind of a now collective redemption that we are awaiting. a collective redemption of the house of Israel that we are awaiting following the Exodus, now following this moment of the Passover. And I want us to think about the personal redemption in Exodus chapter 33 and the collective redemption in Ezekiel chapter 37 for a moment. Today, we are marking the 120th anniversary of one of the most difficult moments in modern Jewish history and a precursor of things to come. The pogrom, the riot, the killing of the Jews of Kishinev, which occurred on the 6th of April, started on the 6th, between the 6th and the 9th of April in 1903. This moment in Jewish history was a turning point, and this is one of the reasons I am mentioning it. A few days before, a young lad, Mikhail Rybachenko, was found dead in a city just 15 miles north, a town 15 miles north of Kishinev, which at the time was in the Russian Empire, today is the capital of Moldova, in a town called Dubasari. Within a very short time, a young girl, a teenage girl who attempted to commit suicide, was hospitalized in a Jewish hospital in the Kishinev area and then died in the hospital. A couple of virulently anti-Semitic newspapers, Russian newspapers, started to spread stories that these two young people died in the context of an anti-Semitic plot to kill young Christians in order to make matzah, in order to use their blood, a whole number of different things. These two newspapers called for the killing of Jews, called for a crusade against the Jews, and then went on to accuse the Jews of abusing their Gentile neighbors by being capitalists and lending money abusively to their neighbors and a whole number of other things. These calls were repeated as the police was instructed not to intervene, not to interfere. On the 6th of April, 1903, these riots started in the evening. More than 700 Jews were injured, mostly badly, in these riots. More than 50 were killed. Hundreds of Jewish homes and businesses and institutions were ransacked, were burnt, were destroyed. The cruelty of the Kishinev pogrom was something that people had really not seen before. I'm not going to describe all of it. I'm going to say it was horrifying. It included some of the things that we are seeing occurring today, unfortunately, in the Ukraine. And I'm, given the crowd here today, I'm not going to outline what happened, but included people being killed and injured in a whole number of horrifying ways. A number of, by the way, Russian intellectuals stood up and spoke out against anti-Semitism, including major intellectuals, people whose names we know, Leo Tolstoy, Maxim Gorky. I mean, a number of major intellectuals stood up and spoke out against anti-Semitism. But what happened was that the American Jewish community then, for the very first time, mobilized against anti-Semitism in Russia. The American Jewish community, for the very first time, started to organize against anti-Semitism. The New York Times put out articles about anti-Semitism in Russia. The Jewish community came to mobilize and came to create offices in Russia and to build up a relationship with the Russian Jewish community and to start to truly advocate for the Jewish community in Eastern Europe in the context of anti-Semitism. This happened in 1903 in the context of the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the Kishinev massacres. Another thing happened in the context of the Kishinev massacre that most people don't really know about. Most people think that militant or militaristic or defensive Zionism started as a result of Arab-Jewish friction in the land of Israel. That's not so. Vladimir Jabotinsky, Zev Jabotinsky, started formulating the notion the Jews had to be able to have the power to defend themselves and to create a military wing to their national movement immediately following the Kishinev pogrom, the Kishinev massacre. In other words, the Kishinev massacre was a turning point in the way Jews saw themselves and decided to organize as a community as a response to anti-Semitism in a way that would reshape Zionism and that would reshape the American Jewish community. Right around the time Jews were marking the redemption of Purim and the Exodus, right around the time wherein the Jews were reading the Haftorah with regard to the valley of the dry bones that come back to life. Jewish history, Jewish lore, our Jewish texts teach us that we live in the world and that the world is what it is and that we have to be realistic and clear-eyed about the world. Even in moments of crisis, like the crisis of Jacob, his fear of death in the context of the meeting with Esau, the crisis of Moses that we read about in today's Torah portion, or the crisis of Esther when she pleaded for her people in front of Ahasuerus. And yet, we know from this weekly Torah portion that even in these moments of crisis, our hope lies in others finding grace in us through their eyes. And that one day, perhaps the vision of Ezekiel will come to pass, and the martyrs of our people and all of these people who once upon a time celebrated the Passover will be reconstituted into a new house of Israel. So even in the context of pain, of hard memories, of crisis, we seek to find virtue in us, in ourselves, and have others find virtue in us through their eyes. And we pray for the redemption and reconstitution of the whole house of Israel. And so, I hope that we can take to heart this message of hope and of redemption this Shabbat, on this week of the Passover, and during the Passover for many years to come. Shabbat Shalom.